Elderar was a vast continent full of thriving nations. Players engaged in combat and participated in political systems. But elsewhere, players were finding unique ways to survive. The Nether, where rivers of lava flow and the fires never burn out. A brutal world of survival and conquest took shape. But despite these harsh conditions, players formed nations here, each vying for control over precious resources, like netherite, gold, and fortresses. Among these nations, none were more feared nor more powerful than the Nether Empire. The Nether Empire had built a massive fortress. They dominated the region. The Nether Empire ruled with a golden grip. But beyond the Empire's reach, other nations thrived in defiance. These groups clashed. Fighting between them was very common. The Nether was chaos. However, the nations in the Nether worked hard to keep peace between them. While skirmishes were abundant, no official declaration of war was ever made in the Nether. But sometimes, war was close to happening. In one instance, a Vantransian player was seen griefing the Empire's main gold farm, a critical resource. And within minutes, nearly every available Imperial player mobilized. Quickly, more Vantransian players began to appear, and tensions escalated. And then, shortly after, 3 Imperial players, Hates, Thunder Tower, and Just Cow, launched a bold, unauthorized strike on Vantransia's gold farm. Vantransia erupted in outrage. The threat of war loomed. For a moment, it seemed inevitable, but against all odds, the Empire's diplomats managed to defuse the crisis. The war was avoided, and it was with good timing, because a larger problem was on the horizon. For the first time, the Nether nations put away their disagreements. Their new focus was on a massive portal that had just opened, leading right to the Overworld. Tired of living in this hellscape and looking to conquer the Overworld, a large Nether army formed by the portal, and eventually, they charged in.
I have come to put a stop to them forever, to sweep them off our land, fight them. Long live the Empire.
Suddenly, in flames and netherite armor, players emerged from the portal, and they were not here for peace. They stormed into the overworld with brutal purpose, weapons ready to inflict damage. The sky darkened as word spread. The Nether has invaded. Nations across the overworld heard of this invasion. They knew they would have to protect their land from the invaders. The nations of Snowcoma and Daybreak mobilized. They marched towards the portal. The Nether players settled on top of a mountain ridge, seizing the higher ground. Snowcoma knew not to attack them going uphill, so instead, they hiked up the mountain from the west and marched across the ridge until the two armies met. What followed was a tense stare-off. The army shot arrows at each other, but eventually, Snowcoma was ready to make a move. They quickly rushed the Nether players, hoping to get a few kills and take the netherite armor of the Nether players.
Coming up the mountain! Guys, they're going on the mountain.
Yeah.
They're not coming directly for us. They're gonna go on the mountain.
On the mountain.
So we're right on even plane.
They're pushing through some.
Find the mountain and hill.
Use your lava. Use your lava.
Oh,
Up ahead.
If you're low, retreat. If you're low, retreat.
no, you're below. That's fine.
Start firing arrows on them.
Down right now.
Yeah, single them out. Single them out.
3 people right now. Whoa! Oh, these guys are too
One down.
good.
There's one guy in the middle right up here.
Leave me alone. Oh my gosh.
Alright, start pushing back to the mountain if you can. If you can't kill stragglers, push back to the mountain.
No. Oh, they are.
No, wait, they are.
Pushing up, yeah.
Get the hell out.
Pushing up.
They're pushing.
After a long fought battle, Snowcoma didn't make the progress they hoped for. They realized the Nether players with their far superior armor would most likely win this battle. So Snowcoma and Daybreak players retreated, heading back to the Snowcoman capital. But as Snowcoma and Daybreak ran back, they were intercepted by players from Falkland. Falkland had heard the rumors of the Nether invasion, but saw a weakened Snowcoma as the easier prey. Falkland chased the retreating Snowcomans back to their capital, and another battle ignited, this time beneath the tall ceiling of Snowcoma's great cathedral. Then from the horizon, the Nether players arrived. What followed was a chaotic fight. The capital of Snowcoma became a battlefield, a storm of three forces locked in. The cathedral ignited into flames, lava poured out from the windows. As time dragged on, it became clear the war was creating far more damage than anticipated. And in a plea to end the war, many of the overworld nations pushed for a ceasefire. But the war continued for a bit longer, as Falkland and the Nether players continued to fight.
There's another force coming down, a bigger force. We should have pushed them. Like, get back up. Back up, get back up.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
No. They're coming from the other way. They're coming from the way. How many? Everybody, get back. They're about 12.
After some deliberation, the war officially ended. But what followed was far from peace. While some Nether players were able to integrate into overworld nations, the majority of Nether players remained fiercely loyal to their origins. They saw integration as betrayal, peace as weakness. These purists remained loyal to their Nether homeworld. They guarded the portal fiercely, a ruined and charred land where the veil between the two dimensions remained dangerously thin. Skirmishes were abundant here, and neither side could fully control the region. But luckily, an agreement was made, and Nether players were now allowed to freely claim land in the overworld. The Nether Empire would leave the Nether and settle here, becoming the Kragan Empire. Nether players and overworld players were now trying to coexist in the same dimension. Hold on, before we get into the rest of the video, there's something I need to do. Shout out to Altivox for being the host of the Rise and Rule Minecraft server. If you're looking to start your own Minecraft server, I highly recommend Altivox. Click the links in the description to go to their website and join their Discord to learn more about Altivox. Thank you again for hosting the Rise and Rule Minecraft server. Previously, the Union collapsed, and they were forced to hold elections for a new leader. In these elections, the player That Slayer was selected. However, he was already the leader of Numidia, becoming the first player to lead 2 nations. And surely the population of Eldenheim was okay with this. Except, they weren't. Shortly after That Slayer won the election in Eldenheim, unrest began to stir across the nation. Many believed that Slayer's campaign had been driven not by the duty of the kingdom, but by a thirst for personal gain. As these accusations spread, the public's trust eroded. That Slayer made a decisive choice. He abandoned the throne, stepping down in a move that surprised many, and calmed some of the growing tensions. In his place, he named his heir, Tsar Alexander. Ultimately, the instability that followed That Slayer's short reign became the catalyst for Alexander's rise. Under his leadership, Eldenheim flourished, choosing diplomacy and reconstruction over war and conquest. This pacifist approach was most notably seen during the devastating Nether invasion, where Eldenheim stood apart, refusing to be drawn into a conflict that engulfed much of the known world. As the world around Eldenheim continued to shift, so too did the vision of its leaders. In a historic summit that would shape the future of the continent, talks began of unity. The discussion centered around nation merging. Among the delegates were representatives from Sanctaria, a newly formed nation formed from the long-standing alliance between Regnum Dai and Verdania, who themselves had chosen unity over division. Their union stood as a symbol of what could be achieved through cooperation. Once the meeting ended, the union was reformed, a greater, more inclusive version of the original alliance. Then Alexander voluntarily stepped down from his role as monarch. Instead, he accepted the humbler title of Eldenheim representative, a symbol of his commitment to democracy and the collective good. In this new union, power would no longer rest in the hands of one, but in the voices of many, just as the northern state of Snowcoma had long advocated for. However, just 2 days later, the newly reformed Union quickly became the target of suspicion and hostility when Daybreak, a long-standing critic of the old Union, declared war. Their justification was a treaty signed after the Transcontinental War that the Union broke. Daybreak made it clear that the old Union leaders would not be allowed to come back to lead the nation again, but yet it appeared that Dark, who was previously an exiled leader, had returned. Daybreak claimed this violated the treaty. Snowcoma, backing its ally from the Transcontinental War, joined Daybreak in its declaration. Many argued Snowcoma and Daybreak had become oppressive, believing that the ideals they had fought for had been compromised in favor of power. The Union, in a matter of days, began to unravel. Instability gripped the coalition, internal division deepened. Sanctaria and Eldenheim, facing pressure, fear, and uncertainty, withdrew one by one. What had once been a symbol of unity and peace was shattered within days by fear, old grudges, and political rivalries. From within, the narrative was that the Union no longer existed as a single political body, but from the outside, the view was a bit different. To Daybreak and Snowcoma, the disintegration was meaningless, a continuation of the Union under different states. In a moment of desperation, the fractured Union government made a final, panicked attempt to hold the alliance together. Tsar Alexander was reinstated, not as a representative, but once more as the supreme leader of the Union. It was a reversal of the very democracy the nation of Snowcoma had begged for, but it was seen as the only way to remove the old leaders and get Daybreak to end the war. But even this attempt was not satisfying to Daybreak. Daybreak and Snowcoma rejected every plea for peace. Faced with overwhelming military pressure, internal instability, and a civilian population gripped by fear and confusion, Sanctoria, Eldenheim, and Pogdovia made a unanimous decision: unconditional surrender. Daybreak and Snowcoma demanded terms of surrender. Sanctaria, having played a minor role in the Union's formation, was treated with relative mercy. However, Eldenheim bore the full weight of the victor's wrath. As the birthplace of the Union's revival, the terms were harsh. They were to cede 3 islands to Daybreak. Stripped of their capital, burdened by reparations, and scarred by the loss of their former glory, Eldenheim stood at the edge of uncertainty. Still led in part by Tsar Alexander, he called for a national vote. The people would decide their own future. A new name would mark a new chapter. The nation of Eldenheim would officially become known internationally as Nova Eldoria. These events led many to believe that Daybreak and Snowcoma were no longer the peaceful nations striving for democracy and freedom, but now for power and corruption. Hopefully, a large amount of nations don't get together and try to stop them.